Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It's Thursday. That means open forum. And it generally means Jimmy Akin, and today is no exception. We got 2 hours with Jimmy Akin today, open forum. The number 888-318-7884. Open forum is for anyone, whether you're Catholic or not. And it's any question that you've got. We're very, very broad-minded about what questions we'll welcome when Jimmy's here. Jimmy is a polymath. He likes to just talk about all kinds of stuff. So if you've got a question about something you want to ask Jimmy, you are welcome. 888-318-7884. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. The author of The Bible is a Catholic Book, among many other things, and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy, thanks for coming back again.
Hey, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
I'm sure that the lines will fill up, so I just want to alert the caller. If you've got a question, you might want to get in that queue, 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Jimmy, I know that because we had you on Tuesday, you were kind enough to help us out while Tim's away on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So I know what's coming tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World already.
You must be psychic.
I actually, I just have a little bit of memory left. I still have a little bit of RAM left.
Okay, so what's coming up?
It's going to be, oh no, I just had the Ruby Ridge thing in my head, but that was last week.
Friday, yeah.
This week it's going to be Wizard. Don't tell me. Wizard. Oh, you got to help me. It's
the Wizard Clip.
Wizard Clip.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
So this is a famous Catholic ghost story from the 1790s. There was a family in what was then called Middleton, Virginia. It's now sometimes called Wizard Clip, West Virginia. But this family, the Livingstons, had an Irish traveler who got sick visiting them. He got sick and died, and they did not heed his request to get a priest to hear his final confession and give him the last rites. And the night he died, a series of very bizarre events began to happen. They crossed multiple domains, including physical manifestations, audible manifestations, a lot of really strange stuff happening. And they ended up getting some priests involved to try to help them out. And they ended up coming into the church, and they had a voice that gave them supernatural information and guided them for like 14 years.
Isn't that something?
After the event, yeah. And it has Skinwalker Ranch level strangeness. So if you want to hear about that, check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Episode drops tomorrow morning in the early a.m. U.S. time.
Our number here, 888-318-7884. Any question at all is welcome for Jimmy Akin. We got to get to see if we got calls screened yet here. Yeah, we do have call screen, so let's go right straight to callers. Let's go to Andrew in Pennsylvania, listening on Catholic.com. Thanks for joining us on our own website there. Andrew, your question for Jimmy.
Hey, Jimmy, nice to talk to you. I was just wondering, I'm a Catholic come home pretty recently in my life. I went to Catholic high school, and now that I'm kind of getting more into my faith, I've kind of just been reflecting more about my experience at Catholic high school and stuff and just thinking about it. And I came to a realization that I'm wondering of your opinion of, considering that it's kind of odd to me, if there's any spiritual significance to the fact that my high school that I went to, which was Catholic, is now in a building which was previously run as a Masonic temple and still has Masonic symbolism and statues up around the school, including in areas that we do Mass in. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Well, I would say it's not ideal. The Masons are an organization that is incompatible with the Catholic faith in various ways. In some countries, in some periods in history, they have been actively, aggressively opposed to the church and have sought to undermine it. Here in America, especially in recent years, that hasn't so much been the case. It tends to be more of just a men's club, and in fact, they even, many lodges welcome Catholics as members, although the Catholics are not supposed to join them. Masons have a kind of indifferentist creed, meaning they believe in a God who they sometimes refer to as the grand architect of the universe. But beyond that, they They don't really care whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever you may be. They're a movement that sprang out of the Enlightenment, which had kind of deistic principles, meaning that they could believe in a God, but they didn't think that he intervened in the world the way that that Christians and Jews and Muslims traditionally believe. And so it is a problematic organization, but merely the fact that it was owned by an organization that had some erroneous ideas doesn't mean the property is cursed. And I'm sure that when it was purchased and it became a Catholic school, I'm sure they went through and they did a blessing. That's very typical when you have a Catholic school being established. Sometimes they'll go through on a regular basis and, sprinkle everything with holy water. It would have been preferable if they would have also removed any Masonic emblems that are around. I understand that could be hard to do, but it would be nice to cover them up or remove them entirely. If they're teaching the Catholic faith there, then that's a good thing, even if it's in a non-ideal structure.
I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks so much for the call, Andrew. Our number, again, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. It's open forum with Jimmy Akin today on Catholic Answers Live, and Giovanni's next, calling from Rhode Island, watching on the Catholic Answers Live app. Giovanni, thank you for downloading the app onto your phone. Your question for Jimmy.
You're welcome, but my question is, the reading today, the first book of Kings, chapter 13, and there's like a story, right, about the young prophet and the old prophet. The young prophet, unfortunately, was lied to by the old prophet and caused him to disobey a command from God. God kills the young prophet, but God doesn't punish the old prophet who deceived him. And I want to know why he didn't punish the old prophet and why he punished the young prophet to me.
Well, in terms of why the first prophet or man of God, as he's referred to in the story, is why God allows him to end up dying, it's because he did not obey, as you said, a command that God had given him. God had given him a command. It was a clear command. He said, don't eat anything while you're in this area, just go straight there and straight back. And instead of heeding to the voice of the Lord, he heeded to the voice of a man. And that can have consequences. So God had given him a special sacred mission, and we don't know precisely why God gave him the mission in the form he did. But if God tells you, I don't want you staying there any longer than absolutely necessary, do not chill out and break bread with anybody, you can infer there's some special reason for that. And you therefore need to take it quite seriously, because ordinarily when prophets are given missions, they're not told something like that. They're told, go here and announce this word to somebody, but you don't get these special do not stay, come back immediately messages. And so if you have that, you need to take it seriously if you're a prophet. In terms of what happened with the second prophet, well, God sometimes immediately administers justice. Sometimes he delivers it a little bit later on, but you can bet that the older prophet eventually got his comeuppance in one form or another, whether or not it's recorded in the text. God's not going to simply let a prophet lying slide. He's going to deal with that one way or another.
Thanks very much, Giovanni. Appreciate the call. We got to go to our first break. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum. Both hours today, open forum, and that means open to anyone with any question at all. That 20 Answers flash sale continues. Here's some great news. I'm just reading you what Carrie wrote this morning. The public demand for these booklets is so high, we've extended our $1 pricing through the end of the month. Visit shop.catholic.com today, where all of our 20 Answers books and ebooks are $1 each. That's a savings of 75% on dozens of great titles, but act now. The sale lasts through the end of August at shop.catholic.com.
Call and ask Jimmy your question today on Catholic Answers Live. The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Did you know there are more than 50 places throughout the country where the remains of aborted babies have been buried? This is Eric Scheidler of the Pro-Life Action League inviting you to join the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children on Saturday, September 12th, when pro-lifers across the country will hold solemn prayer vigils at the grave sites of aborted children. Visit nationaldayofremembrance.com to find the September 12th prayer vigil nearest you, and remember, blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It is open forum today. Jimmy Akin, our guest, our number 888-31-TRUTH. And as you might expect on open forum day, when Jimmy's here, lots and lots of folks on the line. So I'm going to just keep moving. Connor in Nashville, Tennessee is next, watching on YouTube Live. Hey, Connor, your question for Jimmy.
So my question is, was the New Testament, were all the books in the New Testament written by their traditional author? First of all, and then second of all, like, would it be heretical to think that they weren't? You know, like, where's the line between history and you know, heresy, faith?
Yeah.
All right.
So in terms of the church's approach to this, it is not heretical to hold that a particular book of the New Testament was written or not written by any particular person. The church teaches that these works are divinely inspired, and it would be heretical to deny that, but it's considered a matter of history whether or not they were written by particular people, whether God in the course of history chose to use a particular person as a vehicle of his divine inspiration. That's a matter that the church lets scholars to discuss, and so it does not have a teaching that the books of the New Testament were written by their traditional authors. And who the traditional author is will even vary depending on what period of history you're looking at. For example, during much of church history, the book of Hebrews was traditionally thought to have been written by St. Paul. But if you look very early in church history, there's actually a lot of doubt about that. You have other people that the very early church fathers propose as the author of Hebrews. Some people talk about maybe it was Barnabas, or maybe it was Luke, or maybe it was Clement of Rome. In the early 200s, the early Christian author Origen actually says, whoever wrote it, God knows. The important thing is that it was divinely inspired, and God knows who wrote it, but we don't need to be hung up about that. In recent, the last 100 years or so, that view has been revived. And so today, most scholars don't think that Hebrews was written by St. Paul. Some of the older speculations about who may have written it have been revived. It seems to have been someone in the Pauline circle, meaning Paul's group of associates. But we know it wasn't Timothy because it mentions Timothy in the third person. In fact, it just says Timothy has just gotten out of prison and will visit you when he can. So we know it wasn't Timothy, but it seems to have been someone that Paul knew. And the thought is similar to St. Paul's, but there are various clues in the text that point to it not being that. I personally, now you'll find scholars who have a whole range of opinions about who wrote what. Virtually all scholars conclude that some of the letters attributed to St. Paul are definitely by St. Paul. It's basically universal in scholarship that Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Galatians were all by St. Paul, as well as certain other of his were definitely by him. Everybody agrees on those. But there are others that are debated. I personally think that the evidence points to the traditional authorship in most cases, with the exception of Hebrews. However, even for me, there's a question about some of the Johannine literature, the books attributed to St. John. I think they were written by an eyewitness of Jesus's ministry who was named John, which is why they're called John's books. But I think we have good evidence for that. But I have a question in my mind about, is it John the Apostle or another eyewitness that we read about in the early church fathers named John the Presbyter? Because you have these two different figures. And even some of the church fathers, like St. Jerome, will say that at least some of the Johannine literature, like 2nd and 3rd John, are written by John the Presbyter rather than John the Apostle. So there's a question there, and it's for me, and it's something that the church allows people to freely discuss.
Okay, Connor, does that get to everything you wanted?
Yeah, but so just a quick follow-up, like what about parts of the Bible that claim to be written by someone, like Ephesians, for example? I know a lot of scholars don't think Paul wrote it, but it says in the letter that Paul wrote it. So wouldn't that kind of be like this, like?
So this is something that has been, discussed in some length by Catholic biblical scholars. Personally, I think the evidence points to Paul being the author of Ephesians. I don't buy the arguments that it was not written by him. I think they're weak. Having said that, there are books of Scripture that are written in the voice of one person, even though that person may not have been the literal author. An example of this is the Book of Wisdom. In the Book of Wisdom, a good chunk of the book is written in the voice of King Solomon, but it's really clear when you read Wisdom that it's not by the historical Solomon. And one of the ways we know that is because, Solomon lived about 1000 BC, and Wisdom is written in Greek, apparently in the city of Alexandria, shortly before the time of Christ, when Jews were encountering ideas from Greek philosophy. And at one point in Wisdom, it names Plato's 4 cardinal virtues. And Plato lived centuries after the time of Solomon. So this is, I would take it as actually a signal that the author of Wisdom is sending his audience, saying, here's how you can interact from a Hebrew perspective with all these newfangled Greek philosophical ideas you're hearing about. There's a way that we can approach them as Jews, so you don't need to be scared of them, and here's how you can relate to them. He also corrects other ideas that were popular in Greek philosophy, but that were erroneous. And so because Solomon had the reputation of being Israel's wisest king, he uses the voice of Solomon as a literary device to say, here's how, from the perspective of Hebrew wisdom, we can interact with these philosophical ideas that are new and that you're just hearing about for the first time now. Also, there are scholars who will say, well, in the ancient world, they didn't take authorship necessarily exactly the way we do, where if someone's name is on it, it had to be written by that exact person. In fact, even today, we have ghost writers, people who will write, let's say, a book on behalf of another person whose name goes on it. And the way literature worked in the ancient world, there was some more flexibility in that regard, it's argued, than there is today, where you don't necessarily need to name the ghostwriter. In fact, even today, the ghostwriter is not always named. There's a set of books, science fiction novels, credited to William Shatner, called the Tech War series, but it's universally acknowledged Bill Shatner did not really write those. He had a ghostwriter. Yeah, he may have suggested the idea, but he let someone else carry them out, and we actually know who that was, although memory fails me at the moment. It has therefore been argued that someone, let's say, who was very familiar with St. Paul's thought would then be able to write a letter, and in the name of St. Paul, not literally meaning this is by St. Paul, but meaning this is what St. Paul would have to say on these topics, from someone who knew his thought very well and thus could speak for him. And so even with the so-called Deutero-Pauline letters that some scholars doubt were written by Paul, it's still agreed these were by somebody in Paul's circle who understood Paul's thought and was trying to apply Paul's thought to these situations. Personally, I don't buy that that's the case. I think the evidence points to all of the Pauline letters except Hebrews being written by Paul, but that's one way that scholars have proposed dealing with this.
Thanks, Connor, for that call. Appreciate it. I'm a little disappointed. I've lost a lot of my faith in William Shatner now, but we'll move on. I'll just move on. Up next, Marcos in Puerto Rico, listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Marcos, thank you for downloading the app onto your phone. Your question for Jimmy.
Hey there, how you guys doing?
Very well, thank you.
Great, yes. I had a little question regarding to bending a knee in front of a sacred image and like doing the sign of the cross and something like that, because I was talking with a Protestant friend today about that, and I'm a Catholic, he's a Protestant, and so he was telling me that that is an act of idolatry and adoration, and he also told me that veneration is synonymous with adoration. And so I had a little conflict, like trying to defend my position on that. So yeah, I was wondering if you guys could help me there a little bit.
Sure. So the first one let's deal with is veneration is the same thing as adoration. He can certainly claim that, but that doesn't make it true. Even he would acknowledge, I assume, that unless he's being deliberately obstinate, he would acknowledge that he has different levels of affection for different people. You know, like he may have someone he casually knows at work, and yeah, I kind of like that person, but I don't love them the way I love my mom or my dad or my brother or my sister or my wife or my children. So even in just human relations, there is a difference in terms of the amount of affection and respect that we have for and show others. And so that being the case, when Jesus says, love God above everything else, that points to an even higher level of respect. And so there are clearly different levels of affection and respect that we have. And Catholics use the term veneration for some of the lower levels, at least compared to God. And then we use the term adoration when we're referring to the kind that we owe to God. Jesus didn't, when he said to love God, he didn't mean don't also love or show respect to other people. In fact, honor your father and mother is right there in the Ten Commandments. And the second great commandment is love your neighbor. So Jesus recognized a distinction in the levels of affection and veneration that we owe to other people compared to what we owe to God. And so the idea that veneration and adoration are the same thing is just false. It's false in terms of human experience, because we clearly experience different levels of those things, and it's also false in terms of the way Scripture presents it. In terms of idolatry, and specifically bending a knee, well, let's look at a parallel passage in Mark 7, where Jesus is talking about clean and unclean things. And he says nothing that enters a man's mouth is going to make him unclean, because it'll go into his mouth and then it'll pass through his stomach and then it'll leave his body. It doesn't leave him any the worse for that. What does make man unclean is things that come out of the heart, sinful things like murder and adultery and so forth. So it's not what happens with your body that's what's important. It's what happens with your heart. And in the same way, it's not what position your knee is in, whether your knee is bent or not, that ultimately matters to God. It's not the position of your body, it's the position of your heart. And so in some cultures, bending the knee is associated exclusively with divine worship. And if you're a person for whom bending the knee is associated exclusively with divine worship, well, then you shouldn't bend the knee. But in other cultures, bending the knee is not associated exclusively with divine worship. In England, for example, and in Spain, and in many other countries, it's common to kneel when you meet a monarch or to assume some other posture before a king or a queen. And so this shows that you're not worshiping that person. Bending the knee is not automatically a sign of adoration. And so if Catholics in Catholic culture choose to associate bending a knee with a lesser form of devotion than adoration, that's perfectly possible, because ultimately it's not the body and its posture that matters, it's the heart and its posture.
Marcos, thank you so much for that. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and it's open forum, and the lines are hot. You can try it, 888-318-7884. But hang on to that number, because more lines will open up as we go. You might have to keep trying. Open forum, open to everyone, open to whatever question you got. More right after this.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
A few minutes each week with our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus, will help you understand and defend your Catholic faith like a boss. Get it wherever you get your podcasts, or listen anytime at CatholicAnswersFocus.com. We Catholics just celebrated the Assumption and Coronation of Mary, so we asked Father Hugh about these important feasts, and he ended up telling us some really cool things about Mary going to heaven and being crowned queen. Also this week, the Catholic Church teaches that our justification, which can also be called getting right with God, is not a one-time thing but a process. But the letter to the Romans seems to imply that our justification might just be a one-time event. Carlo Broussard explains the truth about what St. Paul taught and why the Catholic Church gets this one right. Catholic Answers Focus is free, brand new twice a week, and now available on YouTube.
Who and what were the major figures and ideas of the Protestant Reformation? Is it true that the medieval Catholic Church was so corrupt that a total religious revolution was necessary? How did the Church respond to the Reformation, and what were its lasting effects on Christianity and world history? In 20 Answers, The Reformation, you'll find smart, solid answers to these questions and many more, in a perfect introduction to the major players, concepts, and events of this defining period in Western history. 20 Answers, The Reformation is part of the 20 Answers series from Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the Church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com today and take a look at this exciting series from Catholic Answers Press.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum. If you've got a question, 888-318-7884. And sitting in with Nick today, Eric. And Eric, everyone wants to know if you know where to find the groovy music. There's much concern on the internet, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, Nick can explain it. 888-318-7884, the number. Mark in New Jersey is next. Mark, your question for Jimmy Akin.
Yes. In yesterday's news, not only on EWTN news, but also on the regular, commercial news, there was talk about a priest in the Diocese of Detroit who found out he wasn't legally baptized because the deacon who did the baptism said we instead of I. And that started making me wonder. He found out because his parents sent him a videotape of his baptism and the anniversary of it. And once he found out the baptism was invalid, he had to go through all the other sacraments over again, including becoming a deacon and a priest, and then all the people that he married now have to get remarried.
Actually, I believe there's a question about that, but how can I help you? What's your question?
Well, how do I know that I was baptized? I don't have a videotape. What happens if they said the wrong words to me? And I'm wondering what kind of a Pandora's box this whole thing opens.
Okay, well, first of all, this is nothing new. There have been invalid formulas for baptism all the way down through history. So this is it may be the first that one hears about it, but there have been different groups down through history that have used erroneous forms for baptism, and that's nothing new. That's something that has really pretty much always been there. Fortunately, the use of invalid forms for baptism is very rare. And in particular, it's very rare in Catholic circles. Now, I don't know what year you were born, Mark, but before a certain point in the 20th century, you basically don't have to worry, because where the craziness started was the 1970s. So beginning in the 1970s, you started having various groups of priests or deacons who wanted to be hip and relevant and make the sacraments more meaningful to people by tweaking the words somehow. And if you were baptized before the 1970s, you basically don't have anything to worry about in that regard. Prior to that point in time, the sacraments were celebrated in a very standard way. People didn't deviate from the prescribed words. In fact, the prescribed words were in Latin. And so, they would just read what was in the text. They wouldn't try to extemporaneously change the words in Latin. But, there was this movement that got started. And fortunately, that's about the time that videotape came along. You started having, even before videotape, you had home movies. And so these recording technologies, even sound recording, started happening. And so during the danger zone, people have had this more or less available to them. However, the danger is still very small. It's very rare that a priest or a deacon is going to use an invalid form for baptism. And even if a priest did in a given case and a person was not validly baptized, God knows the heart of that person. God can give them his grace anyway. There is such a thing as baptism of desire. And so if someone was not validly baptized but wanted to be a Christian and would have been baptized if he had known he wasn't validly baptized, then that person has the desire for baptism, and God can give that person his grace anyway. In the same way, with respect to like confession, if you're sincerely sorry for your sins and you would get baptized and go to confession if you knew that's what you needed to do, God can give you his grace. So we're still in the hands of a merciful God. The sacraments are important, but as St. Augustine is often held to have said, we are bound by the sacraments, God is not.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure it's a question many, many people had, so thanks for the opportunity for answering it. It's just a fascinating story, and it has spawned lots and lots of discussion. Do you want to say something else, Jimmy?
Yeah, I was reading about this case, and the deacon in question, he's retired now, and he apparently was told to knock off the We Baptize business in 1999 and did. So it was apparently for a fairly short period of time that even he was doing it. But as we said last time this issue came up on the show, this is a really good reminder for everyone who administers sacraments. Say the black, do the red. Do not freewheel. If you want to be poetic or hip or relevant, do that in a homily. Do not do that when you are administering the sacraments. And to anybody in this day and age who is still deviating from the prescribed words for the sacraments, shame on you, because it only causes confusion and anxiety on people's parts.
If you want to be hip and cool, you can come on this show too. There's another option for you right there, because we are extremely hip and cool. But come on,
but
I mean,
but
these are the
only after
sacraments.
only after you stop doing that with the word
That's a good point. Probably the priests and deacons that we have on this show, that may not be a problem for them, I would guess, because they get that basic thing. Oh my gosh, come on, let's stop causing anxiety in people. Let's which one do you say and which one do you say? The black, do the red.
And that's that's a saying that Father Zulsdorf has popularized. It's based on the fact that if you look in a liturgical book, the text that you're supposed to say is printed in black, and the actions you are to perform are printed in red. That's why they're known as rubrics, from the Latin word for red. So you say the black, do the red, and you won't go wrong.
Mark, thanks again for that question. Let's go to Jerry in Arkansas, watching on YouTube Live. Hi, Jerry. You got a question for Jimmy?
I do. Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
It's kind of an odd question, and I'll admit up front. But I do want to say thank you so much to Jimmy, because I am a Protestant, but I have been exploring Catholicism and kind of in that strange, weird process where I am, beginning to kind of see perhaps some of the errors of the Protestant way, and Jimmy has played a pretty big role in that. I mean, a lot of the things you've expounded upon have just made a lot of sense to me, and through prayer and things, I've kind of come to see a lot of things. Now, my question is about specifically Daniel 7:27. That's the verse.
Okay.
I was reading that the other day, and one of the things that bothers me a little bit about modern Catholicism is its embrace of America. And when we think about the origin of America, or we even think about the origin of Protestantism, Jimmy, that Martin Luther said that the Pope was the Antichrist. Calvin said the Pope was the Antichrist. If you look at modern-day Christians, they won't really, modern-day evangelicals or Protestants, they don't seem to agree with that. In fact, they tend to believe like a left-behind kind of theology where they think it's some European president or something. So they've kind of abandoned even the initial Protestant idea of what the whole thing was about. They're literally protesting something that they're not protesting anymore. And so that first of all really is strange to me. But what I appreciate when I look at the Catholic faith is how it did stand against democracy. It did stand against the concept of liberalism. That is, this hatred of kings, this hatred of authority. And so when I look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 27, I see something stunning. And Jimmy, I'd just love for you to comment on this, and I would love to hear your comments. But basically, at the very end of that incredible revelation that Daniel has, the dream of the four beasts coming up out of the sea, it says in verse 27 in the interpretation that the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people. And so, in essence, what's happening here is that the kings that are being judged at the court in verse 26, all of their power, all of the sovereignty, all of the greatness of the kingdoms under all of the heaven is given to the people. It's given to the people, that we the people, it's given to the people. And so what perplexes me about this is that I see Satan as a great counterfeiter throughout history. I see him constantly counterfeiting things. And when I look at America, I see a we the people toppling authority, which we're not told to do according to Romans 13. We're not told to do that according to 1 Peter 2:13 and 17.
So, Jerry, so you're saying with the American Revolution, when we throw off King George, that doesn't comport with what a Christian is expected to do in your view. But I got to get you to a question because we are coming very close to a break. So the question for Jimmy is?
Yeah. The question for Jimmy is simply, in Daniel 7:27, it talks about how the people will receive the power of the kingdoms. And today we live in a time where that is true. The people have been given the power of kings. Is this today what we're seeing, a counterfeit of what God's kingdom is all about?
Okay, so I can tell you how Catholic thought historically would look at this question. Now, for context, Daniel is having a vision, and in chapter 7, and at the end of the vision, we read in verse 27 that the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, so that's plural, that's all the kingdoms, shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey them. Now, this verse can be understood in different ways. In a limited sense, it can be understood as a restoration of national sovereignty to the Jewish people who had been under Gentile dominion, but then achieved autonomy again under the Maccabees. And in characteristic language, prophetic language often uses hyperbole or exaggeration to make a point. And so the kingdom that they did receive under the Maccabees, it had limited freedom and it only lasted a certain amount of time, but that gets spoken of in a very grand way to communicate the awesomeness of what it would be like to be a Jew when this happens. There's a greater sense of fulfillment, though, because prophetic texts point to more than one thing. And so there's also a future eschatological fulfillment of God's kingdom where, once again, the saints, not specifically Jewish saints, but all of God's holy people, will receive authority and be freed from the oppression of the kings and so forth and others in history that have oppressed them. And that's still in the future. But I don't think we can draw too many lessons, or at least Catholic theology historically would not say we can draw too many lessons about that from merely the fact that there's this future greater fulfillment of this prophecy. And we can't infer that prior democracies are automatically problematic. In fact, if you read, for example, the back in the 1200s, St. Thomas Aquinas, who was, in addition to being a great philosopher and theologian, also a political thinker, he talks about how there can be a number of different forms that government can legitimately take. He talks about the fact that God, all sovereignty ultimately comes from God, and it needs the consent of the people, but God leaves it to the people to determine precisely what form of government they're going to have. So he names monarchy as one possibility, he names oligarchy as another possibility, and he names democracy as another possibility. And these were the classical forms of government that have been known for the last several thousand years. And so Catholic theology historically has been open to these different forms of government. It is not automatically a counterfeit or a satanic counterfeit just because they've chosen one rather than another. The devil obviously tries to enter into every government to work his mischief, but the fundamental choice of a monarchy, well, the devil can corrupt that, or an oligarchy, well, the devil can corrupt that, or a democracy, well, the devil can corrupt that, but it's not the form of government itself that's the problem. It's what are the people allowing the devil to do, and how well are they living or not living according to God's will. So I wouldn't. Oh, also you mentioned the issue of rebellion. Well, sometimes rebellions are authorized. When, for example, the 10 northern tribes seceded from the 2 southern tribes led by Judah, that was made clear. This is of God. God made it clear, this is my will. I will that these tribes secede, and it would have been illegitimate to try to use force of arms to stop them. So revolutions or separations like that can have divine mandate. And historically, again, going back to the history of Catholic thought, there is a phenomenon known as tyrannicide, where you have a tyrannical ruler that is mismanaging things, and people have had a need to deal with the tyrant. Now, one way of dealing with the tyrant, it's kind of the most brutal way, is to kill him. That's what tyrannicide is. And there are situations where Catholic thinkers historically, including Aquinas, would say that tyrannicide is legitimate. On the other hand, killing the tyrant may not be necessary in all cases. If, let's say, you've got an ocean like the Atlantic between you and the tyrant, then maybe you can just do a secession rather than actually killing him. And so Catholic thinkers, including at the time of the American Revolution, would say we're in a situation where King George, he's gone nuts, we're being oppressed, and it's time to sever ties, and that can be viewed as legitimate in accord with God's will because, as St. Thomas Aquinas pointed out, the form of government must rest on the consent of the governed. And at that point in history, the American colonists were no longer consenting to be governed by the monarch that they viewed as being abusive towards them. And so there, whether you agree or disagree with the analysis that was made at the time, there is a case from the point of view of historic Catholic moral theology to say it was legitimate for the colonies to secede, and that wasn't automatically a bad act.
Jerry, thanks for the call. It's very encouraging to hear your words about Jimmy, but also your question is fascinating. I hope you will call again and we can continue having a conversation with you. I have to take a quick break, so we'll do that and be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
This is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Thank you for listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connection's set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connection's website is homeschoolconnections.com.
She is one of the most beloved saints of all time, honored as the Saint of the Little Way.
Matthew Bunsen and the Doctors of the Church.
Saint Therese of Lisieux entered the Carmelite convent of Lisieux in 1888 and survived only 9 more years. Still, her extraordinary holiness and prayer life prompted her superiors to have her write an autobiography, The Story of a Soul. It became a spiritual classic.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Can we stop running that ad? It makes me feel insecure after that guy talks and then I got to talk. Can we maybe just... Let's get a little more amateurish sound in those ads. 888-318-7884, our number. I got to tell you, though, lines just continue to stay full. The one opens up and then it fills up because Jimmy Akin's here and it's open forum. And the open forum means anybody can call. So that's, more than 7 billion people that we're open to. And also, because Jimmy's here, you can ask about just about anything. 888-318-7884. Tad in Hutchinson, Kansas is next. Tad, your question for Jimmy.
Yeah. So this morning I watched a video by Eastern Orthodox YouTube channel called Bible Illustrated, where he talked about his criticisms of penal substitution. So I was wondering, what does the Catholic Church teach about penal substitution or teach in place of penal substitution?
The church doesn't have a specific teaching on penal substitution. Now, for people who may not be familiar with this term, we should explain what it means. It has to do with the way in which Christ redeemed us on the cross. Everybody agrees that what Christ did on the cross was extremely important, and the question is exactly what was going on there, and so what's the exact nature of what Christ was doing on the cross on our behalf. According to one set of theories, Christ was acting as our substitute. So he experienced things on the cross on our behalf. So we didn't have to substitute God, the punishment that's due for our sins. The question is, was he being punished on our behalf. And that's where the penal modifier comes in. There's lots of possibilities for, Christ being our substitute, but was he specifically being punished by God for our sins? And that's where the name penal substitution comes from. If God was literally punishing Jesus, that would be penal substitution. And this understanding of Christ's atonement is common in some circles, particularly in Calvinist circles. However, it's found in some others as well. Now, as I said, the church doesn't have a teaching on this. There's not a magisterial document that says penal substitution, yes or no. But Catholic theologians historically have not looked favorably on penal substitution taken literally, because it seems inconsistent with the character of God and of Christ, because God is just and Christ is innocent. In fact, he's infinitely holy. He couldn't be more innocent. And so it would be unjust to literally punish someone who is infinitely holy and completely innocent. And so whatever else may have been happening there, most Catholic theologians have looked at that situation and said, well, this is a rich reality here, and there's probably more going on than we can understand with our puny human minds, but God is not literally punishing an all-holy, all-innocent Jesus. There may be language that gets used at times that would suggest that, because you can use, language poetically. You can use it figuratively and communicate a truth, but without meaning it literally. And so you may occasionally run across language that could be taken as indicating penal substitution, but if you do, that language isn't actually meant to be taken literally, because an all-good God would not literally punish his all-good son. He might do something else, like accept his son's self-offering on our behalf. That's entirely different. He's not punishing Jesus there. He's accepting the value, the worth of what Jesus is doing on our behalf, but he's not literally punishing him. And so my own thoughts would be broadly in line with all that. I don't think God was literally punishing Jesus. I think the atonement is a complex reality, and actually I think more than one model capture aspects of the atonement and what Christ was doing. I don't think we have to exclusively choose one model rather than another. I think multiple expressions of what Christ was doing on the cross are appropriate and accurate, but the idea of God literally punishing his son, I don't think is accurate.
Tad, I'm going to leave it there because I want to get another question in before we go. If we can go to Nadima in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. Nadima, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
And how old are you, Nadima?
I'm doing good.
Oh, very good. What is your question for Jimmy Akin?
My question is, why is 3 such a special number? Because there were the 3 kings, the Holy Trinity, the Holy Family, and the 3 days, and lots more.
Okay, so 3 is a special number, and it shows up in the Bible in a lot of places. One of the things we can say about 3 is it's built into our minds in a certain way. God built us to perceive things sometimes in 3s, like the past, the present, and the future. There's a 3 there. Often also stories and jokes have a 3-fold structure. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are various other 3s that happen. We live in 3 dimensions: height, width, and breadth. So there are a lot of 3s that we humans perceive in the world, and we're built to perceive them that way. And so it's not surprising that God would use that fact, the fact he built us to sometimes perceive things in 3s, to help communicate things to us, like the 3 days that Jesus was in the tomb, or the 3 persons of the Holy Family. But ultimately, it all goes back to the fact that God himself is 3. He's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's the most fundamental 3 that would inspire all of the other 3s.
Thank you, Jimmy. Nadima, thank you very much. Marie, can we send Nadima a book if I just have her hang on the line? Can we hang on the line, Nadima? If you're allowed to give out your address to Marie, we'll send you one of our, what are they called? Graphic novels. We got the graphic novels here. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and he will continue to be our guest next hour. So if you're on the line, stay on the line. If you haven't dialed yet, the number's 888-318-7884. I know it is difficult to get through. You're just going to have to keep trying because the lines have remained very full. Right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin right after this. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. As promised, Jimmy Akin for another hour with us. Jimmy, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of a whole bunch of things, including The Bible is a Catholic Book and A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to Becoming a Better Apologist, and The Fathers Know Best, and that list goes on and on and on. You can find Jimmy's work on the internet as well. You can visit him at jimmyakin.com, where he has a good deal of writing there that's available to you, and you can get his podcast each Friday. Well, you can get it any day of the week, but the new episode drops each Friday at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy, thanks for coming back for another hour. Didn't
My
run you
pleasure.
off.
I never left.
Well, we got some compliments, by the way, on Facebook on your Superman shirt. It's a fine
thank you.
Superman shirt.
Thanks, everybody. I had trouble back when I got this shirt back a number of years ago, and it just did not fit. And it just did not fit, and it just did not fit. And finally, I lost a bunch of weight, and guess what? Now it fits. So now I'm much happier with it than I used to be.
I use the other method where I just stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. And but I like
made it uncomfortable.
I like your method. You just slim down until you fit into your Superman shirt. Very good. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but are you more of a Superman than a Batman guy, or do you go one way or the other on that?
I like them both pretty equally, I think.
Yeah.
I read both Batman and Superman.
All right. Fair enough. The number 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin, the guest, and all of your questions give us the content. So if you've got a good one, give us a call. Open forum. By the way, I do want to stress this, and I think people know this too, because we've already had a Protestant gentleman call us up and tell us about his consideration of the Catholic faith. But you don't have to be Catholic. You don't even have to be Christian to call. Anybody is welcome to call with any question they've got. Let's start with Alex in Oregon this hour. We'll go. Alex is listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Alex, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy. Yeah. Well, one thing to say just at the beginning, I've been listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World with my dad, and he and I have been enjoying that quite a bit. So
very
cool.
Awesome
for that. But
who found it? You or your dad?
My question is, my sister actually, and she got me into it, and now he's into it.
It's
so
a family
kind of
affair.
Out of control.
Very good. Very good. All right. Sorry, I interrupted you. You started with your question.
Oh, no, you're good. So my question was kind of just about determining what media, film, and games are okay to play or watch. Because the Catechism mentions that you should try to avoid things that are sexualized or things like that, but it isn't just black or white that way. It's actually very small where you find something that just has no sexualized content whatsoever. So I've been trying to sort of figure out, okay, well, how far do you have to go with that? And when do you know that you can just watch something or play something like that?
The underlying principle, and it's not just sex that it can be problematic. Any kind of sin can be problematic. Now, when it comes to media consumption, whether it's a book or a movie or a TV show or a game or whatever it may be, all of these different media depict humans in situations. They may be realistic situations, they may be fantastic situations, but they depict people in situations. And sometimes they depict people doing things that they shouldn't. And that of itself is not a problem, because if you were to cut out all media and just avoid all media that depicts human beings behaving badly, you would have to cut out the Bible, because the Bible is realistic about human sin, and it depicts people behaving badly. It depicts people killing when they shouldn't. It depicts people doing sexual things when they shouldn't. It depicts people lying and cheating and doing all kinds of things that they shouldn't. So we ourselves are not expected to avoid all reference to people behaving badly. God included people behaving badly in his inspired message to us in Scripture. And so now you can say, well, why did God do that? One of the reasons was as a warning to us to say, don't do these things. And so that gets us to the real core principle about whether or not it's going to be okay to consume a certain type of media. The answer is going to be whether, if God gave us scripture to warn us against these things, well, what's our reaction to a given piece of media? Are we being tempted to commit sin ourselves by it? And that's something that each person has to answer for himself, because different people have different temptations. And consequently, you have to look at your own heart and say, okay, am I being tempted to sin by this? And if it's yes, I am, and it's a strong temptation, and it's a mortal sin that I'm being tempted to commit, then you want to stay away from it. On the other hand, if maybe I'm having a little bit of temptation here, but I can just shrug it off, or it's just venially sinful or something like that, then the flee at all cost order is not in place. One of the things that that people have to bear in mind is that our goal as Christians is not to avoid all temptation, because temptation is built into us and it's built into life. And if you try to avoid all temptation, you're going to fail, because life involves interacting with people and things, and some of those people are sinners, most of them, I'm guessing. Also, some of the things are going to pose temptations on one level or another, even if it's a trivially small temptation. And even if you tried to shut yourself in a sensory deprivation tank, your own mind would come up with temptation. So rather than retreat from the world and not engage it and not do the good that we could do, our goal is not to run away from every temptation that's out there. Our goal is, in light of our knowledge of ourself and relying on God's grace, to manage the temptations that we encounter so that they don't become excessive and so that we don't get led into sin, and especially not into mortal sin. So given all of that, one has to use the virtue of prudence to discern in a particular situation whether a certain piece of media is something that will pose temptations such that it needs to just be avoided, or whether it doesn't really pose that level of temptation, in which case, if it otherwise is a piece of media you would enjoy consuming, then it's okay to go ahead and read it or watch it or play it, provided that the temptation level it poses is manageable and you're not going to be led into grave sin as a result of it.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that call and that question. Got to go to a quick break. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It is open forum today, and the number 888-318-7884. I mentioned before we got all of the 20 Answers books are just $1, but guess what else we've got? You get 50% off all of our electronic materials right now. Hundreds of great resources to choose from over at shop.catholic.com. All the ebooks, the MP3s, the e-magazines. It's all 50% off, and that also goes for the rest of the month, I believe. Am I reading that correctly? Yes, I think so. Just go over to shop.catholic.com. You'll see a bunch of deals. You get the $1 20 Answers books, every single one of them is just $1, and now you got 50% off all of the e-materials like ebooks, MP3s, and e-magazines at shop.catholic.com.
Did Jesus ever claim to be God? Or did his followers later come to think he was divine, like it was for the Buddha? Critics of Christianity affirm the latter. But is this true? The answer is no, and here are some reasons why. First, the idea of Jesus' divinity had to have come from Jesus himself, because it doesn't make sense that faithful monotheistic Jews would just out of the blue begin thinking a man was God. Second, the Gospels record Jesus saying things that suggests his divinity. For example, he applies the divine name, I am, to himself in John chapter 8, verse 58. Mark 2, 5-7 tells us Jesus merited the charge of blasphemy by claiming to have power to forgive sins. So, Jesus claimed to be God. That's a fact. But should we believe him? Well, that's a question for some other time. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Ever wonder about the power of prayer? St. John Chrysostom states that prayer and converse with God is a supreme good. It is a partnership and union with God. As the eyes of the body are enlightened when they see light, so our spirit, when it is intent on God through prayer, is illumined by His infinite light. Let God's infinite light be your guiding light. Ask Him to guide you daily in your prayer, work, recreation, home life with family, and your friendships.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour, and around the world we go. Off to Chile now. Carissa in Chile, watching on YouTube Live, is next up. Carissa, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan. My question is, does formal heresy ipso facto depose a pope of his office? I've been talking a lot with my sedevacantist friends, and this is an argument that I've constantly heard from them.
This is a question that is open in Catholic theology. There has been discussion of it in the past. One of the more extensive discussions of it that's available in English is by St. Robert Bellarmine. And he wrote a series of different works that are available now in English translation, and in his volume on the papacy he considers this question. He sketches out 5 or 6 different opinions that different thinkers have taken on this, and he then weighs in on them and gives his opinion, though it's only his opinion as a theologian. The Church does not have a teaching on this, and so it is in the realm of theological opinion. There are certain things that one would need to make certain of, even if formal heresy did lead to a pope losing office. Number one, it would have to be formal, as you say, meaning the pope knowingly, deliberately, and culpably is saying something heretical. Number two, it would have to be manifest, because under canon law, penalties do not apply to if you just have a heretical thought in your heart but you never say it out loud. The penalty of excommunication does not apply. So thinkers on this subject have agreed it would need to be a manifest heresy, and most fundamentally it would need to be a heresy. And that's something that a lot of people do not understand. People have the idea that a heresy is any given thing that they say that's contrary to what they perceive church doctrine to be, and that is not remotely close to true. You have to do way more than deny a point of Catholic doctrine for it to be a heresy. Now, denying a Catholic doctrine is bad, but heresy is reserved for one particular kind of denial. That kind of denial is if you say that something the church has infallibly defined to be divinely revealed. If you do not refuse to believe something the church has infallibly defined to be divinely revealed, then that would be a heresy. But the vast majority of church teachings have not been infallibly defined. Much less have they been infallibly defined to be divinely revealed. So you can't grab some teaching from some era of church history and just say, hey, you deny this, you're a heretic. That's not the way it works. You have to carefully verify the criteria. Has there been an actual definition, like from a pope or a council, that this is not only true, but that it's divinely revealed? And so I talk about this, by the way, in my book, Teaching with Authority, where I go into how church teaching works and how to identify heresy, and how a lot of people today are seeing heresies where there ain't no heresies. So it's an open question. Some theologians would say, yeah, if a pope did commit manifest formal heresy, he might lose his office. Others would say, no, that wouldn't happen. That's an open question in theology. But fortunately, we are not in that circumstance. And unfortunately, the Seat of Aconteist folks that are out there today do not have an accurate appraisal of the current situation, and they frequently misunderstand both the nature of heresy and when something is and is not infallibly defined. And that's one of the key things that leads them astray.
Thank you, Krista. Appreciate that call from Chile and that question. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's open forum. Got to move on now to Robert in Oklahoma, listening on the EWTN app. Robert, your question for Jimmy.
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I was wondering, since God lives in eternity, if our prayers are, since there's no time restraint on God, if our prayers today are efficacious for our ancestors that we never knew, and should that be considered in regards to purgatory?
Okay, so so the basic answer to your question, in my opinion, is yes. So we can pray for people in the past, either by name or generically. And it could be our own ancestors, even if we never met them. It could be anybody in the past, precisely because God is outside of time, and therefore he hears our prayers right now, in the eternal now that he exists in, and he's got all of history in front of him. And he sees us in 2020 making the prayer, and he can apply his grace to any period in history that he chooses. So if I'm, let's say, now my name, my literal name on my birth certificate is Jimmy, not James. But there was a James Akin who was one of my ancestors back in the 1600s. And needless to say, I never met that James Akin. But I can pray for him, and God can benefit him and all my other ancestors. In fact, I actually do pray for my ancestors, although I tend to only name the ones that I personally knew, and I pray for the others more generically. And this would be true even if God weren't eternal, even if he weren't outside of time. All God has to be able to answer prayers in this way is omniscient. So, Psychelet, is God omniscient?
Yes, he is, Jimmy.
Yeah, so he knows everything.
Right.
So if I pray for the James Akin that lived back in the 1600s in the year 2020, if I'm praying in 2020,
right,
did God know that back in the 1600s that I would one day make that prayer?
Yes, because it's part of everything.
Yeah, so God knows it. So God, even if God weren't outside of time, even if God literally existed in time in the 1600s, he would have known that I'm going to be praying in 2020 for James Akin. And he could therefore apply his grace to James Akin in the 1600s, even if he weren't outside of time altogether. But he is outside of time altogether, and consequently, that's all the more reason that he sees all the prayers in all of history and can apply his grace whenever and wherever it's needed. And that's not just my opinion. That was also, it just happened to be the opinion of the Protestant author C.S. Lewis, who talks about this. And it was the opinion of the Catholic saint, Padre Pio, who made the same point. And there's also indications of this in the writings of another saint, Saint Faustina Kowalska. And in terms of, does it apply to helping people in purgatory? Absolutely, yes. If you look at Benedict XVI's encyclical on Christian hope, Spe Salvi, he talks about this, and he says that because purgatory cannot be measured in terms of earthly time, it is never too late to pray for a loved one, because God transcends time, and he can help that person with their purification whenever they needed it, however time works in the afterlife.
Okay, Robert?
That's great. Thank you a lot.
That is great. Thank you very much, Robert.
By the way, if you want to read more about that, just Google Jimmy Akin and praying across time.
All right. And do you happen to know, Jimmy, what your ancestor James Akin did for a living?
In that case, actually, there were a bunch of Jameses. James and William are both traditional names in my family.
Oh, okay. All right. Again, Robert, thank you for that question. We'll go to New York now for our next question. Aries in New York, you are up next. Your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hey, guys. My question is just, I was watching this discussion on Hank Hanegraaff's YouTube with Francis Chan on the Eucharist. And, one of the points that he made, knowing that he is a convert to Eastern Orthodoxy, he said that, what differentiates, of course, between the West and the East is that it's the issue of transubstantiation, actually more specifically the issue of defining the mystery of the real presence. So
it's just a little bit hard to hear you. So I just want to, Hank Hanegraaff, who is the Bible answer man who became Orthodox. You were listening to his podcast, and he was saying that there's a difference in the definition of transubstantiation between the Orthodox and the Catholics.
Well, it's not in definition. If by definition you mean an infallible act of teaching. So in historic Christianity, whether East or West, everybody agrees that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. He's there. The question is, what's the mode by which he's there? Is he maybe in, with, and under bread and wine, or does the bread and wine become his body and blood, or precisely how does that work? Transubstantiation is the view that the substance, the reality of the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Jesus. So there's no more bread and wine there. And in the East, they haven't settled that question one way or another. Exactly. They know he's really there, but they haven't defined precisely how that works to the extent that it's been defined here in the West. Because here in the West, since the 1200s, it has been defined that that the Eucharist involves actual transubstantiation. The substance or reality of the bread and wine ceases to be there and gives way or becomes Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity. So we have a more precise expression in the West of how the real presence works, whereas in the East, they believe in the real presence, but they haven't determined it as specifically. Now, in terms of why that's the case, it's somewhat difficult to answer. I mean, part of the answer is just the history of doctrinal development in the West and the East is different. And Easterners have not felt the need to define this matter precisely. However, in the West, there was a controversy over this, and in the Western Church, there was a felt need to go ahead and settle this question to deal with the controversy. And so that's the basic answer. It's just a different level of perceived need historically to deal with it.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks for mentioning Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible answer man.
Yeah.
Now, Jimmy, I can't remember if you know him personally. I know you've enjoyed his work, but you know Hank.
No, I was on the Bible Answer Man years and years ago, back when he was still an evangelical.
Yeah, and he was very gracious and did an interview with us for Catholic Answers Focus when he first received the sacraments. What a very, very he was just a very nice person to talk with.
He's always been very nice to me. I'd love to be on the air with him sometime.
Yeah, I think he might be that way because he takes the Bible seriously. He reads the Bible and he takes it seriously.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, so that's well, you're a very nice person too, Jimmy. I'm sorry if I haven't said that enough, but you're a very nice person.
Oh, well, that wasn't what I meant, but I mean, he's the Bible. He's known as the Bible Answer Man, and I'm the guy at Catholic Answers that does your Bible question shows.
Exactly.
So there's some commonality there, and it would be neat to have an on-air reunion with him. No pressure, but hint.
There's a hint if you're listening, Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible Answer Man. Our number 888-318-7884. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers. As a matter of fact, Jimmy's been explaining and defending the Catholic faith for more than 26 years.
27.
More than 27 years. So, you can count on Jimmy's answers then. I just want to let you know before we send you off to the break, you do want to visit shop.catholic.com. We do have all of those great deals, including the $1 copies of the 20 Answers books. And we have all of our ebooks, MP3s, e-magazines, and all the electronic stuff, all the stuff that can just be delivered to you digitally. It's all 50% off. So find your way over to shop.catholic.com for some really great deals. We still got a half hour left, so if you're on the line, stay on the line. If you haven't dialed yet, I want to encourage you, but the lines have stayed pretty full. You can try 888-31-TRUTH.
Catholic Answers Live.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
A few minutes each week with our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus, will help you understand and defend your Catholic faith like a boss. Get it wherever you get your podcast or listen anytime at CatholicAnswersFocus.com. We Catholics just celebrated the Assumption and Coronation of Mary, so we asked Father Hugh about these important feasts, and he ended up telling us some really cool things about Mary going to heaven and being crowned queen. Also this week, the Catholic Church teaches that our justification, which can also be called getting right with God, is not a one-time thing but a process. But the letter to the Romans seems to imply that our justification might just be a one-time event. Carlo Broussard explains the truth about what St. Paul taught and why the Catholic Church gets this one right. Catholic Answers Focus is free, brand new twice a week, and now available on YouTube.
How can a human woman be God's mother? Where in the Bible does it say that Mary was sinless and a perpetual virgin? What can I do to build and deepen my relationship with Mary as my spiritual mother in heaven? In 20 Answers Mary, you'll find biblical evidence for Marian doctrine and devotion, answers to common objections to Catholic teachings about Mary, and guidance on how to imitate Christ as you get to know the Blessed Mother like you've never known her before. 20 Answers Mary is part of the 20 Answers series from Catholic Answers, offering hard facts, powerful arguments, and clear explanations of the most important topics facing the Church and the world, all in a compact, easy-to-read package. Visit shop.catholic.com today and take a look at this exciting new series from Catholic Answers Press.
This is Dr. David Anders. Is God an angry God?
We answer questions like these every day on Call to Communion, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Love that groovy music. Good dancer, Marie. Assistant producer Marie. She's been dancing since she got married, though, so it doesn't count. A little bit of groovy music. Jimmy Akin here. All the lines full. It's open forum. You just can't ask for more on a Thursday. So let's go to Elizabeth in North Carolina, watching on YouTube Live. Hi, Elizabeth in North Carolina. You got a question for Jimmy?
Yes. So, all over social media, I've seen, people claiming to have dreams about, the rapture and the end times. And so I have, 2 questions about it. So should we take what they've had dreams or claim to have dreams about to be true? And do you think that we are living in the end times at the moment?
Okay, so let's deal with the second question first. And this is just my personal opinion because the Church doesn't have a teaching on this. But based on my assessment of the evidence, I do not expect the end of the world to occur in my lifetime. Obviously we're closer to the end than we used to be. This is something that St. Paul himself says in his letters, that, our redemption is closer now than when we first believed. So we're always getting closer, but that doesn't mean we're right at the end. And the track record of people who have predicted that we're right at the end has been dismal. In fact, so far, everybody who has predicted that we're right at the end has been wrong. And that includes all the people in history who had dreams about us being at the end. All of those dreams turned out to be wrong. And so there are some signs that will precede the end. One of the most notable ones is there's going to be a very notable large-scale conversion of Jewish people to the Christian faith, such that St. Paul says, as a result of that, all Israel will be saved. Now, there's room for some flexibility here, but there's going to be some kind of large-scale Jewish conversion, and that hasn't happened yet. And it would take some time for that to happen. I mean, barring a really miraculous intervention. And so consequently, just based on the history of how these predictions have worked out and based on my current reading of the situation, I don't expect the end of the world in my lifetime. But in terms of people having dreams, well, the first thing to note is this is all anecdotal. We don't have a scientific survey showing that people are having any more apocalyptic dreams now than they have had in the past. So, just from a few accounts you read on social media or rumors that you hear on social media, that doesn't give you a solid basis for even thinking there has been a spike in such dreams. And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if there were at least a little bit of a jump in such dreams this year, because we're living in the middle of a pandemic and there's violence in the streets and there's tensions around the world. And whenever things get bad, people think maybe this is the end. Well, even though God can send people dreams and that can tell you about the future, most dreams are not sent by God, even when they describe or seem to describe future events. What scientists have found is that most of our dreams are extensions of things that we're thinking about in everyday life. In particular, they tend to involve things that we worry about in everyday life. So if you're worried about something, if you're really worried about it, odds are you're going to have some dreams about it. You may or may not remember them, but you'll dream about it. And there's a good reason for that. This is something that God has built into our nature. When we dream about something that we're worried about or that we're afraid of, it's like being in a safe environment because it can't hurt you. It's just a dream. So it's like being in a safe environment where you encounter your fear. And what that does on a subconscious level is help you figure out how to handle yourself emotionally if you had to confront your fear in waking life. And so it's kind of like a practice simulation to help get you ready for something that you're afraid of in case it happened in real life. And so in a year where there's a pandemic and there's violence and there's all kinds of bad stuff going on, it's natural for some people to think, hey, maybe this is the end, and they get worried about that. And so they start dreaming about it because that's what dreams do. They confront you with things that you're worried about. And so I would expect there to be at least a little bit of a bump in the number of people who are having dreams like that this year for purely natural reasons. Not because God's sending them a private revelation, but just because that's how the brain works. And so that answers a good chunk of the question. Now, you mentioned the rapture specifically. Catholics don't tend to use the word rapture. There is an event that St. Paul talks about in 1 Thessalonians 4 that some in the Protestant community call the rapture. What this event involves is all the believers being caught up to be with Jesus. The question is what happens next. According to people who tend to use the term rapture, Jesus will then take all of those people back to heaven for a period while things get even worse on earth, and then he'll come back down and reign for 1,000 years, typically said to be reigning from Jerusalem. That's not accurate. If you actually study what St. Paul has to say about this. The event where we all get caught up to be with Jesus occurs right at the end, at the second coming itself, and Jesus will then come down from heaven, and he'll judge the living and the dead, and bring in the new age, the eternal order of things. So that is a different event. And so if people are having this other dreams about this other idea of the rapture, that it's like sometime before the real second coming, sometime before 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, then those dreams are clearly wrong, because that's not what's going to happen. And in all probability, most of the dreams that people are having are just going to be produced by natural subconscious processes as people are given a dream confrontation with their fears, because that's what dreams do much of the time, is they confront us with the things we're worried about to give us some practice on a subconscious level with our worries and fears.
Does that help, Elizabeth?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Now we go to Michigan. David in Michigan, watching on YouTube Live. You are next. Your question for Jimmy, please.
Hi, Cy and Jimmy. I was just curious about someone was having a conversation with me saying that the Bible says you should never make a vow to God. But I thought that was maybe taken out of context, and so I was just curious, what is the view on, taking a vow to God, and then also how does that look with like religious life, religious orders in particular?
Mm-hmm. So Jesus, the passage you're probably thinking of is found in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, you have heard that it was said you need to pay your vows to God, but I tell you, don't swear at all. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And what Jesus is referring to is the fact that people would carelessly invoke God. I mean, they would say things like, oh, swear to God, blah, 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 blah. And they would kind of carelessly invoke God in a not really serious way. And that's what he's trying to rule out. So he says, look, you don't need to do that. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. Just tell the truth. You don't need to use all of this additional language, especially in a careless fashion. But there are situations in which it can be done carefully and reverently. And we do at times see, for example, St. Paul writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, doing exactly that, where Paul will say, God witnesses this thing I'm telling you. God is my witness. I'm telling you the truth. And so there can be situations, as the inspired author St. Paul shows us, where it can be legitimate to invoke God to testify in a solemn way to something that we're saying, the fact that it really is the truth. What you don't want to do is do that unnecessarily and flippantly or frivolously. So that deals with part of the question. Now, in terms of vows, well, vows worked there are multiple different types of vows in the Bible and in history, and Jesus does not have a problem with the concept of certain vows. We know that because certain vows are endorsed by God. If you look in the Old Testament, there is a vow known as the Nazirite vow, which was a way that men and women could consecrate themselves to God, either for a period of time or on a permanent basis. And so that's the equivalent of monastic vows that are either temporary or permanent. And the connection between the Nazirite vow and modern religious order vows is so close that in modern Hebrew, the word for monk is Nazir, and the word for nun is Nazirah. And so it's so clear that these are monastic type vows where you consecrate your God yourself to God in a special way, that even modern secular Hebrew speakers recognize that this is the same basic concept as becoming a monk or a nun, and this vow was endorsed by God. Part of that vow involved at the beginning of your time as a Nazirite, and again at the end of your time as a Nazirite, shaving your head as a sign of your consecration to God. And then the whole time you were a Nazirite, you weren't allowed to cut your hair, and your hair became a sign of consecration to God. Well, we know that even in New Testament times, people would take this vow because St. Paul did. Luke refers in the book of Acts to an instance where Paul shaved his head because of a vow he had taken. And he doesn't stop to explain it, but based on the Old Testament background, we know that Paul, therefore, for at least a time, had consecrated himself as a Nazirite. And so even in the New Age, even in the Christian age, this is something that is legitimate, and we see the apostles themselves doing things like this. And so Jesus doesn't have a problem with vows, provided they're done reverently and in the right context, but he doesn't want to see people doing them flippantly and things like that.
Thanks so much, David. I hope that was helpful to you. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul's Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Don't you feel sometime like there's so many people in the world? How does he hear your prayer? Never think of that, huh? Everybody thinks that. I'm only a little grain of sand on the seashore. Oh, but that's not true. See, God is God. And you and I have to let God be God. I don't know how he does it. He's God.
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live, Open Forum with Jimmy Akin. So many folks on the line. It's been a long time since we've taken questions from Facebook or YouTube. So let me take one from Facebook because a gentleman from Ethiopia, Abby from Ethiopia, asks you, Jimmy, can you please explain 2 Samuel 24:1 and 1 Chronicles 21:1? Who incited to count the fighting men of Israel? I'm struggling to find an answer. Please help.
Okay, so what Abby's referring to is the incident in Israel's history where King David took a census of all of the men who were available for military service, so he would know exactly how strong his potential force was that he could use in warfare against other kings. And it's and this is recorded in more than one passage. It's recorded from one perspective in the books of Samuel and from another perspective in the books of Chronicles. So we get 2 different viewpoints on this, 2 different presentations of it. Now, in one of them, it says God stirred up David's heart to do this. And in the other, it says the devil stirred up David's heart to do this. What's the truth here? Well, it could be, just based on the language, it could be that God caused the devil to cause David to do this. But there's a problem with that view. It would make God the author of sin, because one of the things that is made apparent in both Samuel and Chronicles is this was a sin, and God ends up punishing David because of his sin. And we know that God is not the author of sin. As the book of James says, God does not tempt anybody. He doesn't lead anybody into sin. So whatever else you may think in interpreting a passage, it does not mean God caused somebody to sin. And so that tells us the real solution here. One of the things you find when you study Old Testament language is that because they want to depict God as a strong king, he's the heavenly king, he's in charge of everything, they talk about God as if he causes everything. But it's not literally true that God causes everything. Some things he just allows, but to depict God in this very strong, powerful way, they speak as if God caused it. And so that's what's happening here. Really what's happening is God is allowing the devil to tempt David into taking a census when he shouldn't. But because the author wants to depict God as being very strong from his heavenly throne, he speaks as if God caused this, when really God just allowed it, as we can infer from the fact that God does not lead anybody into sin. He does not tempt people, as James says, and so God is not the author of sin. That would be inconsistent with God himself being perfectly holy. What the other biblical author then does is clarify that it wasn't God who really did this, not literally, it was the devil who did it. And so we have both perspectives shedding light on different aspects of the situation. It was the devil who did it literally, and God allowed that. But the fact God allowed it gets expressed in a kind of hyperbolic or poetic, figurative way.
Abby, I hope that helps you. Thanks for listening from Ethiopia. We understand it's hard to call from Ethiopia, so thanks for posting your question to Facebook. Let's go now to Jesus in El Paso, Texas, watching on YouTube Live. Jesus, your question for Jimmy.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Yes, my question probably pretty simple, but it's a clarification. There are, I guess, two ideas where Jesus was crucified, where the nails were placed either on the palm, this hand, or the wrist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the question is, was Jesus crucified with nails through the palms or through the wrists? And some people have very strong opinions about this. You will find people who will say, well, it couldn't have been through the palms because the weight of the human body will not be supported if you just put nails through the wrists. And this is a little bit gross, but if they tried to crucify him just through the wrists, he wouldn't have stayed on the cross. I'll put it that way. Now, the problem is, and so therefore it must have been through the wrist rather than through the palms. The problem with that is the Romans didn't crucify people the same way all the time. They sometimes would crucify you and then tie your arms to the crossbeam with ropes. And if they did that, well, then they could have crucified him through the palms and then just tied his arms with ropes to help keep him up there. Other people would dispute the idea altogether and say, nah, you can crucify somebody through the wrist and they'll stay up on the cross. So you can't really settle it by appealing to that. You also can't really settle it by appealing to the language that gets used, because the term hand in Greek has enough flexibility it could include the wrist. So you can't settle it just by looking at the language either. Some people have tried to settle it by looking at the Shroud of Turin. And if you think that the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Christ, that would be a good place to look. But the problem there is that also seems to be ambiguous. There are some people who look at the Shroud of Turin and say, oh, it's the palms or it's the wrist, or maybe it's both. Maybe it's kind of the wrist at an angle that then comes out through the palms that then is at an angle that comes out through the wrists. So the short answer is we don't really know. It could be either one.
Okay, Jesus?
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Brian in Richmond, Virginia, also watching on YouTube Live. Brian, your question for Jimmy.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. My question has to do with marriage. So,
okay, what is it?
It is my understanding that the church teaches that marriage brings a man and a woman together for the reason of procreating and bringing children up. So I was wondering if a man or a woman are biologically unable to have children, where would that place them in the institution of marriage?
Okay, so what you said is true. Marriage does bring a man and a woman together for purposes of procreation, but not only for purposes of procreation. It's also for the good of the spouses. And that's something, it's in the Code of Canon Law. Pretty sure that same passage is quoted in the Catechism. But marriage, the way canon law defines it, is a union of the whole of life between a man and a woman for the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. So even if you can't have offspring for biological reasons, whether it's congenital infertility or you're just past the age of childbearing, you can still go ahead and get married for the benefits that it brings to both of the spouses. And that's always been recognized down through church history. People who were widows and widowers, even past the age of childbearing, they've always gotten married. There's never been any controversy about that. It's perfectly acceptable. And the same thing is true if you have modern testing abilities that would show, oh, well, this person can't have children. It doesn't matter. They're just in the same condition that people get to eventually in their lives. They just got there a little earlier for one reason or another. Because if you live long enough, sooner or later, you won't be able to have kids anymore. And some people are just there earlier than others, but you can still get married for purposes of the benefit of the spouses.
Brian, I'm going to leave it there because I want to get to everybody that I can before we have to go. Megan in Canada is next. Don't give her a book. Your question, Megan, for Jimmy Akin.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Hi. My question is about marijuana and the church's position on it. I was just wondering, I get the impression I've heard that the church is not for recreational use of marijuana, but I guess I'm just confused as to why that is, because there's pretty decent evidence that alcohol is actually worse.
Okay, so fair enough. Why is the church okay with alcohol but not marijuana for recreational use?
I am unaware of any magisterial document that expressly addresses marijuana one way or the other. The church does have documents that say you don't want to use illegal narcotics, but in terms of marijuana specifically, I am unaware of any magisterial document that addresses that question and establishes a church teaching on that point. The way I would look at it is I would apply the same principles to marijuana or any other psychoactive substance that I would also apply to alcohol. There is such a thing as moderate use. In fact, there's such a thing as doses so low they have no effect at all. And if anything you're taking is so low it doesn't have any effect at all, then it's inconsequential because there's no effect. Then you can have doses slightly higher that that'll have some effect, but not deprive you of your moral faculties. And if you're doing alcohol in that amount to where it's pleasurable, but it's not depriving you of your moral faculties, or if you're doing that with St. John's wort, which is an antidepressant, or valerian or kava or any other thing, or an antidepressant prescribed by your doctor, well, then there's nothing wrong with that. It may be elevating your mood, but it's not depriving you of your moral faculties. On the other hand, if you take so much of it that it deprives you of your moral faculties and you start doing things that are sinful, whether it's alcohol or something prescribed by your doctor or anything else, then it's bad and you shouldn't be doing that. So obviously, in addition, we want to say we want to follow the laws of our country, but and not do illegal things. But in terms of the underlying moral principle, something that is merely a mood elevant something that elevates mood without depriving you of your moral faculties is not in principle wrong, but it could be wrong in your country.
Megan, thank you very, very much. Jimmy Akin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a great pleasure. Tomorrow is Friday. That means Jimmy Akin's new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World will drop. This is a freaky ghost story, one of the freakiest ghost stories, and it's possibly true. So you want to catch that at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World tomorrow. Also tomorrow on this program, 2 hours with Carlo Broussard. We haven't seen Carlo in a long time. He'll be back. We're going to talk about heaven, hell, and purgatory, and then it's game show time. See you then, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.